Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host, and I'm joined by the film encyclopedia man, Boaz Dix. We are a couple of filmmakers on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode we pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on VOD. Myself and Boaz pick our favourite film from that topic, or team up against a guest and battle it out to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 1. Hello, Podderoonies, or Podsters, if you prefer. This episode, as Oppenheimer is out on the biggest of screens, I believe, in IMAX. We are talking, of course, the legend that is Christopher Nolan films, and very exciting people. We have new guests with us today, Nadeem and Mita from the Movies to Watch Before the End of the World podcast. It does make me think, though, that you guys know something that we don't. But how are you guys?
Good.
We're good, yeah.
Ready for the world to end.
It's fine. Yeah. Waiting for it.
Yeah, quite appropriate that we're relating this podcast to Oppenheimer.
That's true, yeah.
Part of the appeal for Nolan to make that film was there was a moment when they pressed the button that, you know, the atmosphere could have ignited and ended the world. So. Yeah, so that's appropriate, I guess, for this episode.
Yeah,
so, guys, tell us about your podcasts. I am quite an admirer of your podcast, actually, because you guys focus on a lot of like older films, because there's so many podcasts out there that focus on films that are just out from the 1990s onwards, you know, but you go for a lot of the classic ones. So hats off to you guys that you pick a lot of older films, which are just as good as films that come out today. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it started during the pandemic.
Yeah.
We both wanted a way to watch movies we've never seen before and just sort of talk about them with one another. And so that's what we did. We made lists and we went through them. And then now this season, we're watching every Best Picture winner from the Academy Awards from its inception. And so currently we're in the 80s. We're deep in it. But yeah, it's a lot of fun and you should check it out.
So Oppenheimer, then, what do we make of this one from Christopher Nolan? Are we excited, trepidatious?
All of the above?
Yeah. Just like, I don't know why I have all these nerves about it. I'm like, is it going to be good? Just because I didn't love Tenet. I'm going to put it out there.
No. I did not like Tenet.
Yeah. And so I'm worried, just a little worried, just, you know, going in there cautiously.
Christopher Nolan can be, like, we'll obviously get into this because we've picked two very different, I think, Nolan aesthetics of filmmaking in our two films. And I don't know which one Oppenheimer is going to be. Is it going to be like restrained Nolan, or is it going to be Tenet Nolan?
How far
is it going to go? Because it's also 3 hours. Reviews are very good so far from what I've read on Film Twitter. So I am looking forward to it. I find more than Oppenheimer itself, the release date of Barbie and Oppenheimer, I find fascinating.
It's so exciting.
I don't know. But
Barbenheimer, they're calling it.
Barbenheimer. I'm going to get a t-shirt.
I've seen, you know, mock posters of the two films. Mixed together is great.
The crossover. I find that I want to know what the studio decisions were when, you know, Warner Brothers and what major studio is releasing Barbie. I don't actually know. But
I think it's Warner Brothers as well.
Like, why? Why? What did they think? And I guess it's working.
There's
it goes to show,
films.
that, you know, releasing two giant films at the same time can actually be a box office.
Well, I did see a news story where, like, Oppenheimer was primed to move to the winter, but that never seemed to happen, obviously. So they seemed pretty confident that they were going to compete with Barbie. Because obviously, Barbie is frankly more of a commercial film, of course, compared to something like Oppenheimer, a biopic that goes on for 3 hours. But yeah, I'm really fascinated by it. Yes, interested in knowing what kind of aesthetic and feel he's going with. You know, with Tenet, you know, I enjoyed it, but I'm yet to understand it and yet to find anyone that has understood it, frankly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just intrigued that Christopher Nolan is going through this period where he's just using IMAX film cameras exclusively now.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. And there's like no CGI shots at all in this, which I'm fascinated by because
that's the most exciting part.
They're filming like a nuclear explosion, supposedly. So I'm like, how the hell is that going to look like? So I'm fascinated by that.
That's something we talk about a lot in having watched old films, in having watched things like Ben-Hur and Lawrence of Arabia, and how how
that many people in one scene. They're actually there.
It's not like CGI or special effects, and how they did some of the Ben-Hur was the big one. I think when they have the chariot race, and you're literally there's a man getting trampled by a horse, and you're like, well, how did you manage?
There's no computers.
There's no computers to do this. This was all those horses were real. That race was real. Everything was really happening.
Well, they built the whole arena, didn't they? I think
they built the whole arena. It's that's movie magic, and I think it's exciting. When I read that, I read an article that said the same thing, that there's no CGI. That it's like, well, that's incredible, and it's kind of like we've lost that magic of passion. The movies, and like. You can see when you watch one of those movies, it feels real. Yeah. And like when you're watching Doctor Strangelove, for instance, that's not real. It doesn't feel the same way.
And I think with Christopher Nolan, he's one of few directors now where just having his name associated with the film is enough to bring people to the film, to the cinema. You've got people like Tarantino, Scorsese.
Maybe Scorsese.
Yeah. Not so much Spielberg, I don't think anymore, but Denis Villeneuve, people like that, where you see their name on the screen, directed by, that's enough. I don't care what they've made, I want to see it. And certainly, possibly Christopher Nolan maybe comes up the top of that pile right now. I'm a big fan of all of his films. So, yeah. So my choice then for Christopher Nolan films, as I've kind of alluded to already, I'm a big fan of like how he brings huge scale to his films, because a lot of Chris Nolan fans, they do focus a lot on the time stuff and how he messes with time, but I'm more fascinated with how big he makes his movies, and obviously bringing in these IMAX cameras, it just looks incredible. Which I'm always frustrated because my local IMAX cinema where I live has closed down. So I have my closest one. I have to drive an hour away to get to it, which is like, oh my God, that's a long way.
You should tell him that.
He's British. He
Go
should
find him. He's there right now.
But I mean, that's the problem as well in cinema these days, is that you have to basically live in a massive city to be able to watch IMAX movies. And if you don't, you have to travel a really long way to see them. So that is a problem. And I hope that doesn't become an issue moving forward for his films and other filmmakers, but we'll see.
Are you going to travel the hour to go see Oppenheimer on IMAX?
I might do. It's like a 5-6 hour trip.
Yeah, because the movie itself is 3 hours. Yeah. So it's a day.
Yeah, possibly. We'll see. But yeah, I eventually went with Dunkirk. It's so hard to pick, but I think this one was one where I felt the scale of his work the most, certainly from a practical sense, especially. I like things like Interstellar. That's really great. I think it does have third act problems, personally. Prestige is really intricate as well.
I always forget about the Prestige.
Yeah.
It's there.
And obviously the Batman films are awesome.
Yes.
And unmatched. And I think there's probably not too much to add in talking about things like The Dark Knight. But yeah, I went with Dunkirk. So what happens in Dunkirk? Well, going to IMDb, the Allied soldiers from Belgium, the British Commonwealth and Empire, and France are surrounded by the German army and evacuated during a fierce battle in World War II. And we follow characters on the beaches with Tommy and Alex, played by Fionn Whitehead, and some bloke called Harry Styles.
Never heard of him.
And a civilian boat with Mark Rylance and a soldier that comes onto the boat, Cillian Murphy's character, and their journey. And we follow two Spitfire pilots, and their journey. And obviously Nolan does a lot of things with time, and yeah, the Spitfire journey is just an hour, the boat journey is a day, and the guy's story on the beach is 1 week. So it's interesting how Nolan mixes up time there for the narrative. So guys, what do you reckon? What initial reactions to Dunkirk?
I had seen Dunkirk when it first came out, but Mita hadn't.
I hadn't seen it until now. So I finished it last night.
Yeah.
And
I don't know how many of our episodes you've listened to, but Mita loves a good war movie.
No, I don't. I have a really hard time like grasping war movies just in general. Like I'm just not excited by the content itself. But the fact that it's a Christopher Nolan war movie, I think said a lot about it. And if I'm gonna watch any more movie, it would be this, just because I think it is so action packed and it is very much like the actual fighting within the war, and there isn't a lot of content in terms of like discussing what they're gonna do, or like, oh, back home, like I'm gonna go see my gal when I'm out of it, just like that awkward conversation that's there that isn't really actually like very interactive. But I did not hate this.
That's one way to describe it.
I'm just so used to being like, I don't want to watch another war movie. And then I watched another war movie. Yeah. But I think what's so great about this is his restraint in terms of like what he's doing here. First of all, it's only an hour and 45 minutes. Like it's not a classic 2.5 or almost 3 hour film. It still feels very long though. Like it does feel like you're on like a journey with him. This, I think, is all about the visuals. Yeah. Like in a lot of his other movies, there's a big concept. This is less concept, more visually. Like, what can I do? And I think that was very exciting to watch.
So when I first saw it 2017, I think, correct? Mm-hmm. I saw it in theater, and I was really impressed by it. I really liked it at the time. I liked it again watching it this time. I took away a few things, I think, watching it the second time around. One, we actually watched Platoon last week for our podcast, which was another war movie. And one thing I commented on was how war movies have one theme and one theme alone, and it's always about the futility of war. And there's really not much else to say about war. There's no like other real themes. It's really quite like simplistic. And I love that in Dunkirk, he's actually really not trying to say that. He's trying to make it's an action movie first, but it is about survival. Yeah. Like that's really what Dunkirk is about. It's about survival. And I think like man helping man. Yeah. So it felt fresh. It felt new. He knows how to do tension. Like I think no one else can. Yeah. Like he knows how to build tension into his action and into his score.
It's the score.
It's the score. It's that combination and his way of weaving it all together that is so palpable. Because some of those scenes, you are sitting at the edge of your seat, wondering like what's
going to happen. Yeah, I don't think I could watch this in some points. I was just like, this is so terrifying.
It's so terrifying, and that was the other thing. That real sense of like, oh, so they're just waiting to die. Yeah, and like that real feeling of like, you could get out, or they're just waiting for the plane to just circle back around to drop more bombs on them. You really understood how terrifying and frustrating that must have been. So, which is, I think, a really actually hard thing to convey in film because we've seen so much of it. But in terms of a Nolan film, I will say that there's a reason it's his only nomination for best director. I think it's restrained, it's tight, it's Nolan without being Nolan.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying there. And it doesn't really feel, it feels very different for a war film. You don't have like generals in a meeting, and you don't see a big table map and things about, pushing figures along a table or anything, which you would normally expect in this type of thing. But yeah, this is like a survival horror film at times. And yeah, it's just a very different feel. So directing then, for the first segment, one of the first things you notice about this film, when Tommy and his fellow soldiers are being shot at, like the sound of the gunshots are like really loud in the mix. I was checking my laptop, like I was sure it wasn't up that loud.
We were saying that this is a very loud movie.
And after Inception, his movies are loud.
Just loud in general. Wow. Yeah. Really turns up the volume.
Yeah. But the other thing is that this is very much from Tommy's point of view. You see no shots of the Nazis until practically the very end. Like, the opening text just calls the Nazis the enemy. And, all this suggests we're going to watch like a very different war film. And it's more like a survival horror film where our characters literally can't see the enemy other than the planes coming down. So it's a really great start for me.
The start is great, and I think I was thinking that I actually only realized that towards the end of it. I'm like, oh, we don't actually see the bad guys.
No, we
know, we feel their presence, and we know they're there, but we have no physical image to associate with them, and that's, again, it's restraint because it's so tight, and that opening shot, and I know we'll get to that later, it just pulls you in right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it literally just drops you right in there with very, very little context.
Right into it, yeah.
And it stays throughout the entire film. Like, at no point does that ever drop. Like, you are with them the entire time. You're not losing any sense of, like, what it is to be in that position. And that, I feel like that's really hard to accomplish.
And so quickly in a film.
The aerial photography in the Spitfire sequences are just so gorgeous to look at. Like,
beautiful.
It's not the most thrilling with the dogfights, I wouldn't say, but like the immense clarity of what you're watching is amazing, and I think it just brings some more like realism to the dogfights too. That they're not cut really fast to bring the intensity up, which would be the temptation. I just love like the shots where you have like the cameras mounted on the wings and you can see the front or the back of the aircraft, and you can see the other Messerschmitt or Spitfire pretty close in flight. The sound design is really great too, as well as this amazing like Rolls-Royce Merlin engine rumbles by. You can tell I'm an aviation fan. You hear a real rattle from the aircraft at times, making it feel quite dangerous and real. Like, the shock of hearing and seeing like the sparks fly off the Spitfire when it gets shot is amazing too. So yeah, a lot of the aerial photography with the Spitfires I thought was just gorgeous.
No, for sure. Yeah. I actually really like the photography on the beach.
Right.
I thought it was, he works with some excellent cinematographers, and I don't know if it was Wally Pfister who did this or
no, Hoyte van Hoytema, the Dutch guy.
Oh, it's who he's working with now. Yeah. So just act like beautiful without appearing to be beautiful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like there isn't a filter on it. Like, it's it's still natural, but you can see like that is what it would look like. Yeah.
Really, really great. And like, he's always been, I feel like cinematography and sound are the areas where he focuses his time on. You can tell as a director they're important to him, and it shows. I don't actually think he focuses on performance as much as a director.
No.
It's not even in his other films, I'd say. That's just my opinion. I think he's...
No, I would agree. Yeah.
It's more about the
scale and how huge this situation is. Like, certainly the beach photography, you get a sense of how large of a problem this is to get everyone off. You never feel like you're in the same place at one given time, apart from the mole.
Yeah, but even the mole itself, the way he portrays the mole, it's essentially like, yes, it's your gateway to get off this beach, but it's wall to wall people, end to end, and you get that sense of like claustrophobia at the beach, that's amazing.
Yeah.
At like this giant open space, you get the sense of being sardines in a can.
Yeah, and I love that shot where when they're just rammed on this mole, and one of the Stukas are like coming down to bomb them, and like one soldier
looks up
and then gradually more look up, and then all of a sudden they all look up, and that's just a great visual. The fact that he holds that shot for so long, and just the sequence of seeing all that is great.
Yeah.
Did he avoid CGI in this a lot as well? Because there is that scene like when they're in the water and there's fire in there. I was like, how do you shoot that without like somebody? Yeah, because that's just a feat. Yeah,
some crazy stuff.
So I think he's been very vocal about his dislike for special effects. Yeah. And like ever since like Batman, and I remember reading about, not that we're here to talk about Batman, but my favorite like anecdote about Christopher Nolan is that he flipped an 18-wheeler.
Yeah.
In that he did that car chase through the tunnels of Chicago and then flipped an real 18-wheeler. Yeah. That's not CGI.
No.
That I think sums up Nolan as a director.
Yeah. Like, there's you can tell he just really loves cinema.
Yes.
And, like, he wants to make movies.
And not in a Quentin Tarantino way.
Like there is, I feel like there is some pretension with him.
Yes.
Not as many feet shots, yeah. There is a level of, like, pretension with him, but at the core of it, it's just like he's a film geek and wants people to enjoy what he's making. And like you can't ignore that when you're watching his movies, even if it's something like a subject matter I don't like. I can tell he's put so much into this to make it well.
And he goes so far in the practical stuff with the fact that in the distance, way in the distance, literally not using like actors, he's using cardboard cutouts for the soldiers.
Oh,
yeah. I didn't realize that.
You know, which is quite fascinating.
Money saver.
Pretty cheap way to do it, yeah.
Nolan's a frugal guy.
Yeah.
Literally goes that far to like just use cardboard cutouts where you could easily just like digitally paint them in, maybe.
Yeah.
Want to do that either. I think the first like ship sinking scene is pretty intense stuff where a torpedo like seemingly comes out of nowhere.
Yes.
Like the explosion that follows goes off with quite a shocking thud. You know, the way the water bursts into like the big metal it comes in so quickly into the ship, and again is shocking and scary. And I quite like how they don't try and add any extra artificial light so you can't see what's going on properly. No, it's shot in just a way that the light is coming from real light sources. You know, if you can't see everything properly, then so be it. And I loved the scene when the second ship is sinking, like the Minesweeper, I think, and you see these brilliant like disorientating angles where the water is coming at you from almost above you in the frame before the water consumes them. Just brilliant stuff there. And also just with this practical sense, it's an interesting choice that he goes with the fact that he uses a real like French ship instead of using like visual effects to create a real British one, which is interesting. So Nolan would rather have an authentic, realistic feel than trying to be completely historically accurate artificially. So I would suspect for some audiences that's going to bother them that they're using a French real ship and not a British one. I get that, but I think you wouldn't necessarily have the same feeling, maybe. I don't know, it's an interesting debate there.
I think it says a lot about him as a filmmaker and what he values. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but like I think he recognizes it's the ability to know what's going to work in the final product. From like a pre-production standpoint. So like a year in advance to be like, no, this is not going to look the way it needs to look in the end product. So here's how we're going to do it.
And also like, he's not just making movies for those historians. Like he's making it for mass appeal. Yeah. So why would you just like try to stick with one thing when you know something works elsewhere? I think it also speaks to the confidence in him as a filmmaker, which I think it's something I like to talk about a lot, is that you can tell when a filmmaker is confident in their work and confident in what they're doing. And something like that is a clear example of it, that he knows what's going to work, and he's got conviction in what he's doing. Yeah. And like, fine, it's not historically accurate. Does it need to be? Because really, at the end of the day, does it need to be? Yeah,
it's more about the feel and the texture of what he's going for, rather than being completely historically accurate. But if you go with that, then you're putting artifice in there as well. So it's just an interesting balance he goes with.
Yeah.
I love the scene in the trawler when Tommy and Alex catch up with the Highlanders and hide inside it. Then when we hear the gunfire and you see a bullet hole, like the tension all of a sudden is so high because you're just trying to anticipate when the next gunshot is going to happen and whether the Germans know they're in there. You know, the scene is cut between Collins trying to get out of his sinking Spitfire, which is a very like different tension being created. You know, is he going to get out in time? But the tension is never lost with the men in the trawler because bullet holes could appear at any moment to make you jump out of your skin, which certainly the first one did with me. So nothing's lost there. It's all in the moment in the trawler scene. Just, I think that's the most highly strung scene, I think, in terms of tension for me.
Hey, I'm James Lovino, and I'm here to tell you about Alternate Sides, a movie podcast with a twist. I've worked in the film business for 2 decades, but I haven't actually seen that many movies, and this has been driving my frequent collaborator, Sam, a self-confessed film snob, crazy. So every week, while he's stuck in his car trying to avoid getting a parking ticket, thanks to New York City's alternate side parking regulations, we discuss a classic film I've finally just gotten around to seeing. Alternate Sides, a new podcast about movies, parking, and a 25-year friendship, wherever you get your podcasts.
I really love the point of view from being in a plane looking down into the ocean.
Right.
And the only thing I can think of to compare it to is Top Gun 2.
Right. Similar, yeah.
Yeah, it's a similar idea, but in Top Gun, it does feel very it feels like it's from today. And I don't know what he does where when I'm seeing it in this movie, it does feel like this would have been the 1940s. There's some sort of effect in the entire film itself where it's just I'm sure we just said he didn't care about historical accuracies, but it does feel like that period as well. Because this is also a period piece, but it's not overgrossing as a period piece. No. I'm not focused on costume and set design and things like that. There's something that he does that takes you away from that, because typically that's what I would be focusing on. I look for those little pieces. And there's just there's an atmosphere of you are within this period, but there isn't any sort of notion of you should be looking for certain things.
Have you guys got a favorite shot or scene?
That was mine. For seeing it from the plane down into the ocean, and also all the fire in the ocean.
In the water.
In the water, yeah. So.
My favorite shot was the very opening shot of them walking through France.
Okay.
With the papers.
Yeah.
I find it's just aside from being visually striking, it sets you in, it sets the tone right away. It's something that Joe Wright accomplishes an atonement in an entire section.
Right.
That, it takes that entire sequence of them being in the war in atonement to kind of get that feel. And you're within 10 seconds, you completely understand who they are, what they're doing, where they are. It's such a great shot.
Yeah. Do you think though, they needed the text to come up in that scene? Because I'm not sure they did. Because I think you have all the information you need with those flyers, in that shot anyway.
That's true. There are ways that you could have accomplished that exposition without it. I didn't think of that. I liked the text, but I do see your point though. Yeah,
I'm not sure it's needed, but the first Spitfire shot where you see the 3 Spitfires in formation is just gorgeous. Yeah, the sound of the engines is amazing. But I think my favorite shot is near the end when where Tom Hardy's Spitfire is gliding and you have Dunkirk beach directly below him. The Spitfire is really close up, and I remember it looked incredible in the IMAX cinema when I saw it. The only thing I find difficult to buy though in that scene is when the Spitfire takes out the Nazi plane. I'm not sure the geography is quite right in establishing where the 2 aircraft are, and I know it's supposed to be more of a surprise, but even with no engine, to be able to aim and take out the plane while turning, that always just doesn't feel quite right to me. So I guess, it's difficult to buy, but certainly a few shots before that are incredible.
Yeah, and I agree, because while I was watching it, I was just but where was it?
Yeah,
because I thought the shot before made it seem as if it was much closer than, and this plane is coming from quite far. So how are we?
Yeah, I don't know.
But I bought it.
Yeah.
I moved on.
So directing score, guys, what are you going for Dunkirk? You may use 1 decimal place out of 10.
We've been arguing about decimals
for 3 years.
For 3 years. Right. I love a decimal. Nadeem does not love a decimal.
Unless it's a 0.5, you get it. Yeah. We landed on
8.
An 8.
Yeah.
Straight 8
for direction.
A
straight 8.
Right. Well, for me, I'm definitely going in the 9s. I just think for the sheer engineering involved that Nolan has achieved here is quite remarkable. Just simply like strapping massive IMAX film cameras on the sides of Spitfires is quite amazing that they achieved that. And of course, the level of detail that we've talked about is pretty remarkable. So I'm going to go pretty high. And the sense of scale is pretty huge in this as well for me. So I'm going to go like a 9.5 for me.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's good. I will say to that, and I said it to Mita, there is a reason this is his only Oscar nomination.
Yes.
To which I said, we've been watching the history of all these Oscar movies. Like, there's no rhyme or reason with the Academy.
That's true.
Yeah.
So screenplay then, like the film does a lot of like time hopping, but I do quite like the fact that it's not spelled out for you, where we are in the timeline, constantly having like a title card coming up saying what time it was. Because I think that could be a bit distracting for what you're actually watching. You could lose a little bit of focus on the intensity of the situations. First thinking about where you are in the story, then building the tension up. So you're kind of wasting time there as a viewer. Mm-hmm. Plus, it just brings added rewatch value, which I'm always a fan of in films. At the start, all you have is like on the Mole 1 week, on the boat 1 day, and on the Spitfires 1 hour. The first indicator you have that Nolan is time hopping is that, Tommy and Alex are on the ship and then the night is drawing in, but it's still light on the civilian boat. Plus you see the 3 Spitfires go past the boat, suggesting a lot of the Spitfire action is a lot later in the story. So I enjoy how all the different like perspectives overlap at the end. For me, it's just quite satisfying to watch, even though how certain scenes play out because you've kind of seen them before, but just from a different perspective. So yes, it probably took me a few watches of this to actually get it with the time stuff, but I did find it was quite fascinating, satisfying when you work out what's fully going on,
I did find it hard to follow.
Yeah.
The timeline? Yeah, especially because I just watched it too. So it's my first get-go.
Yeah.
But I did find that a little bit difficult. I also found that just in terms of like characters themselves, I wasn't really, because there is so little dialogue, there isn't any real like connection with them.
Right.
And so while, yes, I'm like concerned because they are in war, I didn't have like an emotional reaction to really like what was going on. There's definitely fear, but typically like with this genre, I feel like there should be that like connect of like, I want to see them actually survive this. This is a survival movie. I should feel something for the people that are going to survive.
Oh, that's interesting.
Do you feel like Nolan sacrifices the character work for like the time hopping stuff? Is there too much focus on that for you?
For this, I think for him, it's really visual. Like, I think that's really his driving point with this, is wanting to show something of this time. Because I don't think I think in terms of like story, that was his focus more of like war than the actual soldiers. I find soldiers and that kind of idealism like more compelling. So there was that like disconnect for me. And I think, yes, he's probably focusing a little bit more on like where we are as opposed to who we're with.
Interesting. I actually think that the simplicity in the storytelling is one of the real strengths of this, because I think Christopher Nolan can get like so wrapped up in a maze in his own like writing. It just gets so convoluted eventually. Like if you look at anything really,
Tenet,
like Tenet or Interstellar, or even Inception. Yeah. I like the simplicity of like, it is at its core just a story of survival, and like I disagree with you, Mita. I don't necessarily think that. I don't necessarily think we need to know backstory. And I think there are times where you need to know backstory, and that helps connect. I don't think in this it does, because I think the basic idea is this man needs to not die.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who he is or what he's going back to. And I think Nolan, that's actually really good for Nolan, because there's a world where he creates too much of a backstory and too much, like even the backstory in Inception it's complicated. There's like a lot going on there.
But you understand Cobb. We'll get there.
We'll get there. But for me, the screenplay is actually, I really like it. I like the simplicity of it. I like that he's doing a little time hop thing, but it's not too much. It all weaves itself together. It is a little hard to follow, but eventually, like,
you get there
eventually, and that's it. He's still doing a Nolan thing, again, without being too Nolan about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously there's not too much character work here. And also he is working through a historical context as well. So I don't know how much reading and research he did with figuring out these characters from real documents. But yeah, I mean, there is a case to say that maybe there could have been some more character work in there without even having backstory. Because I mean, when Barry Keoghan's character dies in the film,
yes,
I wasn't that emotional, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and I love Barry.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was sad, but I wasn't like creating a puddle, you know. So.
But I was moved at the very end when the friend goes to the newspaper to get him into the paper. Like, I was moved by that.
That is moving, yeah.
I got enough out of it to feel a little lump. Yeah, exactly.
Like throughout the film, you have like an unseen enemy apart from the dive bombers. But for Tommy, like the enemy of his own survival is from his fellow soldiers sometimes. Like he tries to get on a ship with an injured soldier on a stretcher, but is turned away and is almost forced out of the trawler by his fellow soldiers, and he could get shot. The characters on the boat have Cillian Murphy's character to deal with, who is demanding to go back home. So the emotions that Nolan is creating here are very desperate ones of survival, regardless of these characters all being on the same side, which I think is so unique in a war movie. So I think he does create a very unique atmosphere here, which is commendable. And I really appreciate that. But did you get that same feeling that it didn't really matter necessarily that the Germans were the enemy, but for Tommy and Alex, like sometimes they were having to deal with each other for their own survival?
I think that played into it plays into the theme that like the whole goal is just survival.
Yeah.
And like even for the alleged antagonists in those scenes, so the other guys in the boat that are accusing the French boy of being a German spy, they're all just trying to survive.
Yeah.
They're all just trying to live. And even though, yes, they look like good versus bad, at the end of the day, everyone their goal is to not die.
Yeah.
And it really does help, like, I think, bring that point home.
I mean, I've never been in war, but no. I'm assuming that is your goal.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not so simple as like, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys.
These are the bad guys.
Yeah.
It's very complex.
Which you don't often see in war films.
Because also, like, even with enemies, I'm sure they're under the same pressures. Like, they may not actually want to be there either. And they are just trying to survive. And their government is telling them, this is what you need to do. So it is interesting as he's focusing just on that one end, because you could say it's the same thing on the other side.
Yeah.
And I think he drives that point home with Harry Styles, actually, because he's the one instigating that whole call out of this French soldier. And then when they're actually trying to plug up the holes, when they're trying to get out, he's eventually let's leave to this guy that he was accusing of being a spy.
Forget our differences, just get out.
Get out. Yeah. So I think it drives that point home that even when you're not on the same page about something, at the end of the day, the goal is to just live.
Yeah. And I think the last 10 minutes or so is really interesting, how like Nolan still creates some tension with how they might be received back home, especially from like Harry Styles' character, Alex. You don't get a sense of celebration or relief when they arrive back in England. You know, Alex mistakenly thinks a man couldn't look at him, but in fact he's blind. You know, Alex thinks he hasn't done anything special. He says, all we did is survive. And the man says, that's enough. You know, there's even a little bit of tension when someone is banging on the window as they pull into the station, but you soon see it's a man giving them drinks, and that the people are proud of the soldiers that came back. So I like how the anxiety of coming home from a disaster is captured there. So that I think that's kind of quite a unique feeling that Nolan has captured here as well with that end.
I wish someone else had those lines though, because it came up. This might just be because I think Harry Styles is a little bitch. But, so that might be why I was just kind of like, suck it up, boy, and just like it just didn't land the same way.
Don't be mean to Harry.
I think, but that's my own thing.
You got through one direction.
But there's something about casting someone like that in that kind of role where it's hard to really remove their like public persona from it. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's truly an example of that, because I was just like, oh, Harry, just being Harry again.
Thinking the worst.
Yeah, exactly.
Except he's like the total opposite. You're not a real Harry Styles fan.
Yeah. I'm not at all. No.
Super positive.
I mean, would you have preferred Fionn Whitehead to say that?
Yeah, I think I would have preferred if I completely get why it was him, but I think I would have had more of the feeling you're talking about if it were not given by Harry Styles.
That's a notion where you could have had more of an emotional attachment to a character.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
because it is more. Yeah, it's understandable. But I guess when he's writing it, I don't think he had Harry Styles in mind.
Yeah,
exactly. He didn't know who it was going to be.
But I agree with what you were saying, Nadine, earlier when Fionn Whitehead is reading out the newspaper. It did get me a little bit of just, the enormity of what they've gone through is quite an emotional moment. So that's certainly for when the emotions started to flow for me. I didn't cry or anything, but I felt something. So. Favorite lines, people? I think mine is, well, we'll know in 6 hours' time when they're talking about the tides. I thought the tides were every 3 hours. Then it's good you're Army and I'm Navy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that was the one of very few bits of humor that I quite liked.
Yeah.
Have you guys got a favorite?
I liked about like halfway through. At one point, they were saying like, "What do you see?" And I think it was Kenneth Branagh. He said home, and then you're like, "No, it's there. You still got a long way to go. It's not happening." Yeah.
Nothing stuck out in terms of lines for me.
It's not a dialogue-heavy film. Yeah,
it's not what I remember It's generally not what I remember from Nolan films. Period. Again, it's the visuals are what are so memorable and captivating.
So, screenplay score, what are you going with, guys?
We went with 8 again.
8?
Yeah.
No decimals?
We're not decimal people, apparently.
Okay. Yeah, I think I might go in the 9s again, really, because I just really enjoy this different feeling you get in a war film like this. As we've been saying, this survival horror type situation is so unique, and just this different atmosphere that Nolan creates within our main characters that, not necessarily the Germans are the enemy here. They've got to deal with a lot of different things to achieve their goals. So I think it is quite unique, and there's a lot of like visual storytelling here as well, which I always admire. So I might go 9.2 for me. Yeah, you can tell I'm a fan of this one.
Yeah.
Acting, then the scores might go down a little bit for this section.
Yeah.
I think the strongest acting scenes come from the boat segments with Cillian Murphy and Mark Rylance. It's fascinating the dynamic between Cillian Murphy's character in relation to the other characters on the boat, because he's obviously dealing with shell shock and does not want to go back to Dunkirk whatsoever. But one moment he could be quite aggressive with Mark Rylance, and then later he's quite calm when he goes into the cabin. And obviously when the kid locks him in, that creates a kind of an interesting tension as well. He definitely brings an unpredictable quality to his character, Cillian Murphy. So I think he's certainly one of the best performers here as well, with such a small role.
I think that Tom Hardy does some really great face acting.
Right.
And that look when he's just looking out onto the beach.
Sure.
Yeah. It's pretty, I don't know. Tom got me. I also just
Tom
really enjoy Tom Hardy.
Exactly. Because I think the strongest performance is Cillian Murphy's.
Yeah.
But he also, I think he's the only one given scope to have a performance, really.
There's the most beef there.
There's
something to work with.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of dimension because you see him at night on one of the rowboats that's there to pick up, as we're starting to realize the how the timelines are working. So he has a little bit more to work with, whereas everyone else generally is a little bit more one-dimensional.
He also is one of Nolan's top players.
He's in everything.
Film, so I think he probably has that connection with him to know like, what is expected and what to do with something when you're not given so much. Like, we'll get into it when we talk about our choice, but like it's not like he knows what to do when it's not necessarily the media's role. Yeah, he knows how to play into it. I
think the thing is that someone like Tom Hardy, for instance, who is a very good actor, and even in like other films, he literally has no dimension in this film because he's meant to be a conduit more than he's meant to be a character, right? Like he's the fighter pilot, but you're cheering for the plane more than you're cheering for the man in kind of theory. And so, and even with the boys on the beach, you could take out any boy and put in another boy and it would still have the same effect. Yeah.
Which I'm curious, why Harry Styles?
It does feel very much like stunt casting, doesn't it?
Stunt casting, yeah.
Which like is honestly disappointing.
It feels like Nolan is kind of going for this type of feeling that like anyone could be in this situation if it was happening now, kind of thing. Yeah, I didn't mind him. He's definitely not the best actor in this film by any means, but I didn't find him annoying or anything. Is that different for you, Nadeem?
No, I didn't actually find him annoying, and I've only ever seen him in this and Don't Worry, Darling, where he was annoying.
Right.
but I don't think he's as terrible in Don't Worry, Darling as people think he is. I think Don't Worry, Darling has some screenplay issues.
Yeah.
And he's just doing what's on the script. Yeah.
I think my issue with Harry Styles is just like you just said, it feels like stunt casting. There's something just off about having him in here. It doesn't feel like, it feels like any other young British man could have done this and it would have been just as good.
Do you feel like Nolan was kind of worried about the marketing of this film? That, you know, this is a war film. Like, am I actually gonna be able to?
Warner Brothers definitely was.
get bums on seats for this, you know, for such a historical film. So like, okay.
I don't think Nolan gives a shit. I think I feel like Warner Brothers was just like, you can't have Mark Rylance and Barry Keoghan and like a bunch of no-name British people that no one recognizes. You need something.
Yeah, you need a bigger star.
You need a bigger star, and I feel like was probably I feel like they might have even pushed Harry Styles to be the lead boy. I forget his name. Alex?
Oh, he is Alex.
Theon Whitehead.
Yeah, Theon Whitehead. I feel like they probably pushed for that, and Christopher Nolan was just like, no. Smaller,
I want this one.
Yeah. I think the acting from Mark Rylance and Tom Glenn Carney is brilliant when Harry Styles said on the boat, when he says, he's dead, mate. You know, the shock on Tom's face is great, but he's trying to hold in a lot as he's got like lots of soldiers around him. Like the same is said for Mark Rylance. You know, he's in shock, but he knows he can't show too much. You know, when Cillian Murphy asks if the boy is okay, will be okay, Tom says yes, reinforcing that fact. But you can see that he finds it very difficult to answer, you know, that question with a lie.
Yeah.
So that was quite a nuanced piece of acting, which I quite liked. I think the acting in the trawler is brilliantly done, and definitely the strongest scene for these group of actors on the beach. You know, when they're deciding to choose who should leave to make the trawler float, like the fear and anger really comes through here, you know, really showing that these guys were just kids, really. So yeah, I really like that scene as well. Favorite performances, guys, who are you going for?
Cillian Murphy. I think he's very great in like everything he does, and that's why I'm also very excited for Oppenheimer, because it's his first, like, he gets to be the lead finally, and I think it'll be really good.
I also like Mark Rylance, but that's just because I like Mark Rylance.
All right.
Like, I think he's dependable in that, like, he's a nice warm face to see on screen, and he's dependable. But performance wise, it's Cillian Murphy who has like the depth.
Yeah.
To do that.
I think I might go with Theon Whitehead as Tommy. Like, he does a lot of heavy lifting in this for the majority of the film. So, you know, I think he brings an innocent quality to this film, which we can all kind of connect with in a certain way. Yes, he doesn't say too much, but I think there's enough subtlety in his acting that carries us through to the end, really. He's very much the everyman, every kid, I suppose, that really works for me, so I'll go with him. Acting score, guys, what are you going with?
We landed on a 7.
Sure.
No decimals.
Okay. Yeah, I think certainly like the acting, I think in all of Nolan's films are never going to be the strongest element of his movies. So yeah. I think like I might go like an 8.2. Right, let's add up the scores then for Dunkirk. Dunkirk gets 49.9.
Oh, wow.
No.
Which is pretty good, pretty good. That's it for part 1. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 2 to see who wins. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell us what your favourite films are relating to the episodes. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for Twitter at FVF_podcast. If you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode. If you're feeling really generous, you can buy us a one-off coffee at our Buy Me a Coffee account. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.